G'day audiophiles, this is the Sirens of Audio, the podcast that explores the universe of Doctor Who in the audio medium. My name is Dwayne. Dwayne, that's right.
My name is still Philip and not Dwayne. G'day Dwayne, you're being a funny boy tonight.
It's just a mood. I'm in.
One of those moods are you in, okay? G'day audiophiles, good to have you here with us.
We have got one of those special segments in our episode today, which is in fact the entire segment of the episode, which we like to call We've Got Randomoids. Yes, it's Randomoids time again, and I was very, very happy with the two selections that we picked this time, because we didn't use the Randomoid Selectatron. We didn't get Toby Haydock's Who's Round popping up at us 50 times before we got a selection, Philip.
No,
we chose one for each of us. So for me, you chose the Companion Chronicle, The Last Post.
That's right. And for me, you chose the Unbound full Fathom Five.
And speaking of full Fathom 5, we've got a special extra surprise that we don't usually have on our randomoids for full Fathom 5. If you stay tuned, we were able to have a chat with the author of that particular Unbound story, David Bishop. And Unbounds are all the rage at the moment, with Doctor of War just being released. That's a box set, the Colin Baker box set, that I haven't heard yet, and I'm very, very eager to listen to, Philip.
Yes, I've got it downloaded, ready to go too. I just need to find some time.
Time. We need some wibbly wobblies. All right. Instead of jumping in the rabbit hole today, we are going to go straight into our chat on the stories at hand. So I'll throw in a trailer for The Last Post. We'll talk about that first. Here we go.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions. Doctor Who, The Companion Chronicles, The Last Post.
Dear Mum, I was wondering if you'd had any more thoughts on predestination. As I was going through the possessions of the head of the research establishment here, I found another of those letters.
Playing second fiddle. And to a man. Oh.
Mum, he's an alien.
Is he green?
Actually, he looks a bit like Uncle Bernard. The doctor burst in all triumphant. Liz, your mother is charming.
We swiftly called his device the Apocalypse Clock. This world does not have long left.
My name is Liz Shaw, and I've come to stop the end of the world.
Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
All right, Philip, do you want me to give you my overview on the story? Because this is one you chose for me.
Yes, I'd love to hear what you thought.
Well, it is a great format, the Companion Chronicles, isn't it? So you can do different things. I really loved the way The Last Post was a single story that was weaved throughout most of season 7 of Classic Who. So there's references of the Madame Tussauds waxworks, and then right up to the Stallman computer by the end of the story. I also love the way that this story is written, delivered by letters between Liz's mum, which I've forgotten her name off the top of my head. Liz's mum, played by Rowena Cooper. That's the main thing we want to talk about, because she's become our queen.
Dame Emily Shaw.
Emily Shaw. So she's now become our Queen Victoria in Torchwood, and she does a great job here as Liz's mum as well. So they're doing a lot of communication about some certain goings-on throughout the first episode. Very interesting concept, really. A bit of a Chimes of Midnight type theme, where people are getting knocked off and predicted to get knocked off. At the end of the first episode, it was a very interesting cliffhanger, which kind of changed the direction of the whole story, and it sort of, in some ways, gives you two complete... even though it's the same story, it's done in such a different way that it's always fresh all the way through. And I really loved it. So thanks for choosing this one for me, Philip.
Yeah, that's okay. So one of my favourite books is a book called Les Liaisons Dangereuses, which was considered a film with Glenn Close called Dangerous Liaisons. And Peter Capaldi's in the film. But the book is far, far better. But the interesting thing about the book is the entire book is done in letters between the two main characters. Actually, mainly to the two main characters, some other letters as well. And just through writing letters, the whole story is revealed bit by bit. It's a very clever way of doing a story. And of course, this story is all done through just conversations. There is a couple of live conversations at a restaurant bar, but there's letters being written, there's telephone conversations, but these two characters are just, two-handed back and forth revealing things. I just think it's such a clever way to reveal slowly bits of the plot. It's by James Goss, and we do know that James Goss is just an amazing writer, unbelievably inventive. And I did a bit of research. He was very keen to write this story just because of all the silly deaths that happened in season 7. So you've got people being poisoned by isotopes. You've got, characters like, I forget the name, the doctor guy in the Silurians who dies, not Nida, who dies first with the plague. Whatever his character, Doctor Whoever. But he goes total, cray-cray before he dies. And so this story explains why all those
why he went so crazy.
Yeah, why it was so crazy first, why these bizarre deaths keep happening. It's just linking a whole season of bizarre, weird deaths of people together, and it's just very amusing how it does that. As I said, it does reference Inferno at the end and the Starman Project, but even references Planet of the Daleks later on. It references other stories that are to come later in the Pertwee reign. So
I think Planet of the Spiders. Did you
Planet of the Spiders is referenced because but also there's there's another one that's referenced as well further on. I forget, but they introduce characters that we get to know later on as well. So it's very cleverly done. I
would definitely recommend anyone listen to it. So I don't want to spoil who the main villain is of the piece, if you can call it a villain. I've said it. But I love the way James has referenced this particular classic story without actually naming what it is. But we all know what it is by the end of the story. So the computer system that takes over the world. Did I spoil it?
Well, it's a bit more complex there too, because there's another little twist towards the end too. It's very clever, and it's just the reason why I love the Companion Chronicles and love people to share them is because the authors have to be so creative with what they do. And as I said, two people, two-handers, and this is just such the most wonderful creative story. It's a love letter to Doctor Who and that 7th season. It's Carol and John's final work. It's quite tragic. There was actually plans to do a trilogy of stories with her and her mum using Rowena Wallace, and I'm pretty sure they were drafted, but Caroline John would actually pass away just before that was able to be done. So this is her final...
Rowena Cooper, isn't it?
Rowena Cooper is playing her mum.
Wasn't Rowena Wallace the one of the actresses from The Prisoner?
Did I say Rowena Wallace?
You did.
Oh, okay. Ignore me, everyone. You know what I'm like.
It's funny because I've just been watching a few episodes of Prisoner too.
I never watched it. I was too young to watch. It was too scary when I was a kid, so I never went back. So anyhow, there was supposed to be a trilogy had been planned for Caroline John and Rowena Cooper together with so Liz and her mum, and unfortunately this was the only one that got produced because Caroline would tragically die. I think very young. It was actually a bad year we lost a few very amazing people, Doctor Who people around this time in quick succession. And sadly, Caroline was one of them ones to pass away. And having met her once, she was such a lovely, generous person. So those are my thoughts. I picked it because I like it, but let's get your final thoughts, Dwayne. What did you think? Are you glad you listened to this story?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm never disappointed when I listen to a companion chronicle. I just wish I was able to schedule more. I find I put the companion chronicles to the side a little bit because there are quite a few I haven't heard. And you every now and then you should throw me one of these and tell me to listen to it and force me to, like I've forced you to listen to the following story, because they're all very, very good, and some of them we've got thankfully with those performers and actors that we grew up with, like Carol and John. And she got to do some of these before she passed away, which is wonderful. I mean, we've got Daisy now, but it's nice to have Carol and John, her voice in our ears. And the Companion Chronicles is probably one of the most prolific ways we can do that with Big Finish.
Yep, definitely.
So, tell us about the story I threw to you, Philip. Maybe I should throw in a trailer. Let's just say it. Full Fathom 5. It's an Unbound story with Unbound sixth Doctor story, Doctor of War, has just been released in the last week or two. I thought I'd throw you an Unbound story, my favourite one from the initial run of Unbound. It's full Fathom 5. Here is a trailer.
Welcome to the Deep Sea Energy Exploration Project, General Flint. You won't regret coming here.
I hope not, Professor Vollmer. So, this is the DEEP that eats so much of my R&D budget, huh?
That whole area of the seabed will still be contaminated by radiation, even after nearly 30 years.
If it's so dangerous, why are you going?
I'm going for you, Ruth.
I shared my hopes and fears with you, things I couldn't tell anyone else. And this is how you repay me. With betrayal, going behind my back, diverting money from my funding for this freak show.
Oh my God, it's a baby! What is this place?
It's a horror show. An exhibition of atrocities, all in the name of science.
Oh, you're not going to the seabed in that rust bucket, are you?
Hey! My Neptune is the fastest commercial mini-sub on this coast.
The Neptune. How original. Wouldn't the Titanic be more appropriate?
Have you ever thought of taking up smuggling, Doctor?
If I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Who the hell are you?
Smith. Dr. John Smith. But everyone just calls me the Doctor. I've come to save the day.
So, Philip, what are your thoughts on Full Fathom 5? Give us a rundown. What did you think? Did you remember it very well?
Well, I did remember it, but my views have changed. So, from the initial run, this was probably if not my least favourite, my second least favourite in the run. Certainly when we went through it, I did not like what they'd done with the Doctor. So, I think maybe I wasn't quite on board with what the Unbound concept was yet. And I think because the first one was a first Doctor sort of remake and the second one was sort of a third Doctor remake, the fact that this Doctor went for a pragmatist, what if the end didn't justifies the means. I wasn't expecting the Doctor to be who he was. So when I first listened to this, and I must admit I've only listened to it once before, which would have been when it came out. So that's almost 20 years ago. My memory of this was I just didn't like what they did with the Doctor. Listening to it through again, though, with slightly different eyes, it is a fabulous story. Now, I still don't particularly like the Doctor. I mean, a Doctor who doesn't care what the ends means. But now being behind the concept better, it was fabulous. This is an amazing adventure. It has the double storytelling in 2 time zones is a really great way to tell a story. Sari O'Neill as the companion, the first Doctor's daughter, Ruth, she's spectacular. And this is a story that just grips you and keeps driving you forward, wants you to know what's happening, what's the cause behind what's really happened. Because you're trying to work out, how's the Doctor been separated for 27 years from the TARDIS. There's so many layers to this, and the ending is just so shocking that what 20 years ago I just hated as an ending, this time I think this is fabulous. So I think my views have almost totally changed 100%. It just shows it really is worthwhile going back and listening to stories again, because whatever place I was in when I first listened to this, I thought this was a bit ho-hum, and now when I was just gripped by this and couldn't put it down. I had other things I had to do, which I just put off because I had to finish listening to this story.
Wow. I also remember you dropping little comments from time to time when I referred to this story during our time on the podcast, Philip, when I knew that was your opinion. So I was very curious to get your feedback on this one, because it was definitely my favourite of the Unbound range. And I suspect that ending that you refer to would be what Gary Russell originally wanted. He would have said, this is what I want, do a story around that. So that's what David Bishop did. He's not the only Bishop in the story. We had Ed Bishop, who's a big guest star, who is kind of topical as well, because he was the star of TV's UFO. Big Finish has just released information on a new UFO release that they are doing, so that's going to be interesting to hear that as well. So, yeah, getting Ed Bishop in the cast was probably overshadowed the actual story. At the time, I remember how big it was. It was the thing that got me actually looking for UFO and watching it, because I'd never seen it before. And I do enjoy UFO. It's a definite forerunner to Space 1999. Could even be like a prequel almost. So
I don't think Gary had much to do with this, actually. I mean, I know Gary wrote one, but he was actually the one in charge, and he just said he was too busy to do it. So it was handed to somebody else to do. See, the thing about I love David Collins, and I think, as we've been talking about the Robots series, having David Collins come back was just wonderful, because I love Paul, I love his work, and so for me, I was looking forward to, because I thought David Collins was going to be such a friendly, supportive, loving Doctor, and to have him play the Doctor he does wasn't what I expected. So I think that might have been another thing that at the time turned me off, and I know that we've often talked about this, and I've been very disparaging towards it. So I was very surprised how much I enjoyed as we went through. And as I said, my memory of the story is the same. My memory of so the plot line and things, I remembered it all, but the adventure just gripped me in a very different way. So maybe I was just in a different place this time.
I think David Collins is a very, very underrated actor in terms of the Doctor Who universe. If you look at his 3 television appearances in Revenge of the Cybermen, Robots of Death, and Mordrin Undead, his characters there are completely different. Every single one of them has a difference. And I know your Poole is kind of the caring personality that's coming to the fore there, but what was his character's name in Revenge of the Cybermen? Can't remember. But it was, totally different. Totally different. The megalomaniac, misguided leader of the Vogons, and then the sort of how would you describe Mordrin? As a sympathetically two-faced character, you could say, in Mordrin Undead. So very, very interesting performances on TV. And this, as the Doctor, I thought to myself, if any one of these Unbound Doctors could be the Doctor, it would be David Collins. Even though he's not the same personality that we expect from the TV series, he would have been a great choice, actually, as a TV Doctor.
I always thought he would be a great Doctor.
Yep. All right. Have we got any final thoughts on Full Fathom 5?
Well, we have the author to listen to, don't we?
Right. Well, let's have a chat with David Bishop, because I didn't realise that David was from where he is from originally, but we picked up on his accent before we started the interview, and actually originally from New Zealand. So I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, that's a local boy writing for Big Finish. I mean, anyone who's good from New Zealand we claim as Australian anyway. So
that's right.
We'll just call him Australian.
All right, let's chat with David Bishop now.
So we've just been chatting about the Unbound story Full Fathom 5, and we're very lucky to have the author of that story on with us at the moment. So David Bishop, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, we love getting a bit of author background in terms of how stories went. Can you start off by telling us more about the Unbound series? How did Unbound come about?
Well, it was a cunning wheeze by the folks at Big Finish. So in 2002, obviously I guess what would have been then the 40th anniversary of Doctor Who was coming up at that point. Yeah, 40 years. Well, and they were thinking, how could they celebrate Doctor Who for its 40th anniversary? What could they do that would be distinctive and different? I mean, we're talking about a period where it's before the show had come back at that stage. So they were dealing with classic Doctors, and that was all great. But they were thinking, what more could they do to add an extra element to it? So the idea was floated around, why not do the equivalent of what Marvel calls their what-if stories, and in DC Comics terms, they called Elseworlds, which is sort of alternate reality, a different take on the Doctor, or some element of continuity of the Doctor and what would happen if something different occurred. So they reached out to people who were writing for them at the time, and I was one of those people who was invited to be part of the Unbound series. I had been writing, I'd written a couple of Judge Dredd audio dramas when Big Finish had 2000 AD license, and I also wrote one of the first series audio dramas for Sarah Jane Smith. I wrote Test of Nerve. which seemed to be reasonably popular with people. So Big Finish were happy to get me back. I'd got on well working with Gary and John Ainsworth, one of the people involved at the time with a lot of Big Finish releases. So yeah, so there was a call was put out to see if anybody was interested in having a crack at writing an Unbound Doctor Who. And I'd written sort of, as I said, Judge Dredd and Sarah Jane, but wanted to write for, the main range. So this was an opportunity to do that. So I was like, yes, please. And I've been digging through my files, and I found an email from the 10th of October, 2002, which is from John Ainsworth, when they were trying to arrange to get everybody together to have a meeting to talk about ideas for Unbound, what we could do with it. So we ended up meeting on, it looks like Wednesday, the 16th of November, 2002. And unfortunately, Jonathan Clements, who wrote one of the other stories, was going to be away in Spain at that time. So he couldn't meet us. So it was myself, Mark Gatiss, Nick Briggs, Rob Sherman was there as well. I'm not sure whether Gary was there. I can't quite remember. Anyway, we all met at the Fitzroy Tavern in Fitzrovia in London, which is where I think Doctor Who fans still gather there on the first Thursday of each month. And then went across the road to the Bertorelli's restaurant and went upstairs and had a long meal, and quite a bit of wine, I seem to recall, was consumed. And ideas were kicked around for what could be done with Unbound, what sort of stories people wanted to tell, what bits of continuity they wanted to play with and alter and tweak and see where it could go. So that's how it began, effectively, yeah.
So was anyone given a doctor at that time? Did you know which doctor you were writing for, or you were just going to be writing for your own creation?
No. It was, some people had very strong ideas of the sort of stories they wanted to tell. And I know Jonathan Clements was sort of like an alternate take on the third Doctor. And then Mark wanted to do sort of a what if around Gallifrey and the first Doctor and Susan. And I think they'd already put feelers out to some of the actors to see whether they would be available. But the joy of Unbound, of course, was it threw up the possibility that you could cast anybody as the Doctor if you wanted. So they had a female Doctor. They had Sir Derek Jacobi in Rob Sherman's story Deadline. So all sorts of possibilities were floating around who they might cast as the Doctor. And then it was thinking about what actors would be available. And one of the thoughts was, are there actors who really should have been cast as the Doctor when Classic Who was on TV, and what was missing? So it was an opportunity to sort of redress the balance, if you will, of history and get the uncast Doctors to be Unbound Doctors instead. So yeah, I didn't have a very fixed idea of who would be perfect for my story. I do recall at one stage, as Full Fathom Five was being developed, there was talk of Derek Jacobi playing the Doctor, the Full Fathom Five Doctor, which was slightly terrifying, I have to say, when you're thinking about sort of this grand classical actor, this giant of the stage. And I'm like, I've only written 3 audios. I'm not quite, I'll give it a go. Fortunately, he went with Rob's story, which was a perfect marriage of actor and material. And for Full Fathom Five, we got David Collins as the Doctor, who's just a wonderful performance, and whom I've always... He's weirdly my favourite character in all of Sapphire and Steel was when David Collins would turn up being Silver. So yeah, I was very happy when I was told David Collins was going to be the Doctor in my Unbound.
I think I was always very fond of him as Paul in Robots of Death. It was sort of...
absolutely. And he's in Mordred Undead as well, of course.
Yeah. Now, of course, you're Unbound. So, as I said, the very first one to come out by Mark Platt was a first Doctor spin, and then the second one was more of a third Doctor spin. But then yours was the first to come out, which was actually an anti-Doctor, I guess. So, how did you end up in it? Because I mean, spoilers, people, but if you haven't listened to it by now, get onto it. I guess the moral ambiguity of this Doctor, and you just don't like him, really. There's a warmth to him that it's bizarre. You managed to capture a warmth to him, but still he's very anti-Doctor. How did you come up with a Doctor that was going to be an anti-hero?
The essence of my Unbound was, what if the Doctor believed that the ends justified the means? Which has been a methodology that people have used through centuries of mankind to do a lot of terrible things frankly, and the belief that it leads to a better ultimate outcome. Whether or not it does is another matter. So, and the sort of elements of it were inspired in some ways by the sort of the Cartmel master plan and the Seventh Doctor, who's quite sort of manipulative and holds secrets back, but has a very strong moral core. And also like, well, where could you go next? And you think about the Veil Yard as well, who then turns up in a later Unbound audio. How much further could you take the Doctor if you recast the Doctor and made him, as you say, into a true anti-hero, somebody that's willing to do whatever is necessary to do what is ultimately he perceives to be the right thing? So that was the core of the story. And then it's about writing, trying to find the balance of that, because obviously Full Fathom Five depends upon a series of reveals and twists and surprises and shocks and revelations that span out right to the very last moment of the audio. One of my goals with it was to create an audio that you could listen to more than once. Because some stories you can listen to them and, well, that's it. You know what happened and it was fine. But do you necessarily want to re-listen to an audio when you get to the end of it where you're like, well, no, tick that one off the box. So one of my goals, egotist that I am, was to come up with an audio that you would listen to the end and immediately go, and it sort of, the ending rewrites your understanding of the story. So there's a lot of clues and hopefully subtext that layered into the story that on a second listen, it listens differently from the first time that you hear it. So that was another part of the challenge of writing Full Fathom Five. But I have to say, an awful lot of the warmth that comes from the Doctor in the recording, in the audio, is absolutely about David Collins and his performance, that wonderfully mellifluous voice that he has. Sort of he could make anything seem somehow slightly appealing. So he does a wonderful job of that.
Yeah. In terms of construction and the writing, it's very much two different time zones happening. And I mean, your choice was to go backwards and forwards between the two of them. So we keep going, having flashbacks, which I guess helps with the reveals. I mean, how did you actually write it? Did you actually write the whole past section first and then cut it up? Or were you actually writing going backwards and forwards? How did you construct the story?
I mean, it was always constructed the way it's presented to the largest extent in the final version. I mean, there was one big change that happened after the first two drafts. I'll talk about that later. But I always I wrote it as a dual narrative, braided, if you will, sort of interwoven, the two strands, 27 years apart. And I absolutely wrote it. I would write one scene in 2066, I think it is, and then I would jump back 27 years to 2039 and then alternate between the two. And that was always the design of it, so that because the challenge of a dual narrative is that you don't want one of the narratives to seem dull, and you don't want to, can we just fast forward through this bit over here? It's like when you watch a TV show and then a character you don't enjoy comes on and the temptation to just move on to the good bits, please. So it's always the worry with a dual narrative is, are both strands of the story going to pull their weight? Are they going to be of equal interest? And doing it gave me the capacity to, as you say, you would have a reveal in one time period, which would then resonate in the other time period. And because there's sort of secrets are being held back or what happened in the past. So no, I wrote it X, then Y, then X, then Y, then X, then Y. That's my methodology.
Now, I believe there's a story behind the 27 years and the dates you chose. What's the background between how do you choose those dates?
Yes, I'm obsessed with the number 27. It's my lucky number. I do an awful lot of things around 27 because no good reason, just because. And then 2066 was setting the story 100 years after I was born, because I am that shameless or / bereft of inspiration. I would just reach for the easiest number that comes to mind. So yes, that's why it's called that. And indeed, one of the characters in it, Volmer, is named after my grandfather. So, easy inspirations are always a quick goal for me.
No, it's great. I mean, you don't recognise them on the way through, but they have some significance later on. Now, you say that you made some changes, because I believe it was a bit of a tortured process in terms of writing this.
Yeah, well, there was a big old pivot, because I'd written, I did a draft plot line for it, and that got signed off. And obviously all things had to go away to the BBC to be signed off as well. And considering the nature of the Doctor in Full Fathom Five being quite different, we had to wait to make sure that it was going to be signed off by the BBC that he could do what he was going to do in the story. I mean, I think because it was before the show came back on TV, I'm not sure BBC licensing were necessarily paying that much attention to what was being done, as anybody who's read Transit by Ben Aronovich can testify to. So that was fine. And then I started writing. I did 2 drafts of the script. And then I got an email from Nick Briggs, who was script editing for certainly on my one. And I think he may have been across the whole series of Unbounds. And he had notes from Jason Hay Gallery, who runs Big Finish and who was a director for full Fathom Five. And let's see if I can find that email. This is the start to an email you never want to receive as a writer, which is, "Hi, I know it's not what you want to hear, but I think there are some major changes to be made here." And you're just like, oh, this is the moment as a writer, your heart goes through the floor and takes up a subterranean position. And the problem was, there were 2 problems with the first 2 drafts. One was that the Doctor's motivation for what he was doing for those who don't know, full Fathom Five, the Doctor goes to the DEEP, the Deep Sea Exploration, something or other, project. And he's, but his motivation for going there was a bit thin in the first couple of drafts. So that needed to be resolved and figured out. But actually the big note that came back was I had invented a new companion for the Doctor called Caitlin, who was going to be, she would have met the Doctor in a previous story, and she sort of tags along at the start and is running after him and attaches herself like a limpet to the Doctor at the start of Full Fathom Five, the original drafts. And then she was by the Doctor's side as he goes down to the DEEP and things occur anyway. And Caitlin is the one with the pistol at the end of the story in the original drafts, where things occur about which we will say no more, on the off chance that somebody hasn't listened to Full Fathom Five before they listen to this podcast. Anyway, so it was Caitlin was the one with the gun pulling the trigger at the big finish, if you'll pardon the pun. But the note that came back was Jason suggests dropping Caitlin because it gives more room for another character called Ruth to be the one who knows the Doctor. If, as he promised, he looked after her, he could have known her for years. And then there was also a thing about where the TARDIS was during when all of this was happening. So the suggestion was basically, well, page 1 rewrite of the entire script, which is not what you want to hear after 2 drafts. But, you know, the reaction always when you get notes like this on a story is the first 24 hours is wailing and gnashing of teeth and, you know, kicking any passing whatevers that might be in your path. And then 24 hours pass and you go, oh, you know, the worst part is they're right. And that's so irritating. But it's for the good of the story. And the thing is, the goal is always to make the story the best it can be, the best version of itself. So after 24 hours of wailing and gnashing of teeth, I went, oh, yeah, no, that would be better. So I took the character of Caitlin, who was in 2 drafts and has never been heard of again, lifted her out, dropped her into the nearest waste bin, and then just redistributed her lines to other characters, largely to Ruth, and then did some other rewrites as suggested and to respond to the notes. And it was amazing because Caitlin removed from the story, streamlined the whole narrative, and it was like the water just closed over the space that she had needlessly occupied, and you never knew that she was gone, which is the sign of a superfluous character if ever there was one. Yeah. So yeah, that was the big change. Was the 3rd draft was the elimination of Caitlin and a couple of other things to do with the Doctor's motivation. But that one change, taking her out and tightening the focus down to the Doctor and Ruth, who's a sort of he's almost like a substitute father for her. We discovered. I was
going to say Ruth is kind of the Doctor's daughter. Like she's sort of the first Doctor's daughter that we come across in Doctor Who.
I know, yeah, absolutely. That's the role. He's become sort of like a foster father for her for the past 27 years, looking after her during these 2 time periods that we see in the story. And then that has all sorts of consequences and ramifications because she comes to the conclusion that all of that has been something of a betrayal or a lie or what really happened in 2039 and then what is revealed in 2066 has huge ramifications for her and their relationship. And how they respond to each other as the story progresses.
It'd be curious to know what happened to her story afterwards, because she must be so totally traumatized by her entire upbringing. I suspect she's going to be in therapy for the rest of her life.
Well, quite. I mean, I do have history with these sorts of characters, having done my best to try and bring Dodo back from the dead and Who Killed Kennedy, which is another Doctor companion given a hard time and kicked to the curb. So yes. I think poor old Ruth, assuming that she has enough bullets left at the end of the story, then she has the small issue of, how do they get away from the place?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's left in not the best situation.
No, it's such a bleak story. But like I say, Sari O'Neill's Ruth just wonderfully played her. I mean, all the cast was just amazing. You couldn't fault anyone. Ed Bishop does such an amazing job as General Fling. These are all things we would have talked about already.
I was lucky. I got to go to the recording day at Moat Studios, which is, I think, that's where Big Finish was at that point, which is not far from Brixton. And I remember going along to the sort of recording day and sitting in the booth behind Jason while he was directing. And got to meet Ed Bishop, having grown up watching UFO and things like that. And then there he is in the flesh. He would persist in calling it the DEEP when everybody else was calling it the Deep. I was like trying to persuade Jason to persuade Ed Bishop to say it, but no, he wasn't having it. So that was not a discussion that went very far.
Well, listen, thank you so much for sharing your recollections on Full Fathoms 5. We're looking forward to speaking to you later in the year about some of the other stuff you've done. So we know it's just a short time. You're going to come back later. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you're doing at the moment, though? Because I believe you're now publishing some books. Do you want to tell us what's come out recently?
So in my copious spare time, I now write historical thrillers set in Renaissance Florence. And I've got 2 books out in the series so far. The first one's called City of Vengeance. And that came out hardback during all the lockdowns last year and came out in paperback at the start of this year, 2022. And then the second book in the series is called The Darkest Sin. And that came out in hardback and audiobook and ebook at the start of March 2022. And they're both set in late Renaissance Florence. And actually, one of my Sarah Jane audio dramas, a lot of the research I was doing at that time, because I've been researching these novels for 20 years now, ended up creeping into one of my Sarah Jane audio dramas. But we can talk about that later.
We will. And your publisher's D.V. Bishop, is that correct?
Yes. I publish as D.V. Bishop because there's too many other David Bishops who write books now. Curse their names. And also it's very popular with writers of historical crime and historical fictions to be called initial surname. And so the V is for my grandfather, whose surname was Volmer. That's how I ended up as D.V. Bishop.
Excellent. And you said audiobook. Who does the audio reading for you?
It's a wonderful actor called Mark Meadows, and his Italian is brilliant. In fact, what's really helpful is I get to listen to the audiobook and find out what people's names, how they should be pronounced.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to try and make sure I've listened to at least one of them by the next time we speak together. Listen, David, that's marvellous. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. And lovely recollections. I can't believe you still got emails from that far back. It's I never throw anything away. And I never throw anything away digitally. Paper, that can go.
Are you reporting for duty, CyberMe 1?
Yes. We meet again, CyberMe 2.
Cyber Control reports that complaints regarding the Me 1, Me 2 segments have been initiated.
Report back to Cyber Control that those reports have been eradicated.
A satisfactory response, CyberMe 2.
Excellent.
Cyber Control reports that the Big Finish Randomoid Selectatron has been successfully infected with the Haydock virus. It will now only produce episodes of Who's Round to the hosts of the Sirens of Audio.
This is excellent news, me one.
Agreed.
These We've Got Randomoids episodes are irrelevant.
Agreed.
Okay, so that was a fantastic little chat there with David Bishop. Technical issues from my end while we're there, so I didn't get to say much, but it's Tasmania. We have blackouts here in Tasmania. I'm just surprised we haven't had as many blackouts during the podcast recordings as we have. So our recommendations for this week, Philip, we made an executive decision, well, you did, that our recommendations will be the stories that we talked about. So check them out. The Companion Chronicles, The Last Post, and Full Fathom 5, one of the original Unbound range. So do that. I did want to just
tell us what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to mention one thing. I came across a book that my son was reading the other day. I'm going to hold it up, see if I can do that through the virtual background. It's called Cows in Action. What's the name of it? World War Moo. Right? And I was looking at it, and then the author popped up at the bottom. Steve Cole. So I was completely unaware that Steve Cole had a children's book range. Did you know that, Philip?
I did not know that.
He's got lots of them. He does lots and lots of kids' books. So if you've got kids like me, and my son is reading Cows in Action at the moment, check out Steve Cole. That's just my little recommendation, not for listening so much, but for recommendations to our kids. So I was very impressed to suddenly discover that name.
And feel free to get on to the couple of books that Dave Bishop wrote too. You can listen to them on audio, or you can buy them paperback too.
I'll put some links for those in the show notes. Okay, Philip, so before we go, we have got to pick the next 2 stories for our Randomoid selection. And I think it's about time we brought the Randomoid Selectatron back. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great idea.
This could take some time. Let me bring it back. Hang on. Okay, are you ready, Philip?
Yep, let's see what Toby Haydock we get first.
Okay, Philip, here's pick number 1. It is a lost story. We've done one of those recently with Mind of the Hodiak. We're going to go back to another one. And this one is... What lost story would you like to review, Philip?
I don't know. Just tell me what it is.
Shut up and tell me what it is, he says. All right.
Yes.
It's The Guardians of Prophecy. Sequel to The Keeper of Traken. Got the Melkur in it.
Okay.
Is it a sequel? Can't remember if it's a sequel.
Or a prequel.
It could be a prequel, actually, now that you mention it.
Maybe a prequel. But
so originally by Johnny Byrne, but adapted by Johnny Morris.
Okay.
So released in May 2012. So that is our first pick for the next Randomoids, The Guardians of Prophecy. Okay, for our second story, Philip, I am personally very, very excited about this one. It's going to be a 6th Doctor Randomoids episode. We've had a full 8th Doctor one. Now we're going to be a 6th Doctor, so with the first one being Guardians of Prophecy. The second story is also featuring Nicola Bryant too. It is Ish.
Oh, okay.
And this is one of my favourite 6th Doctor stories from those early years. And for those who don't have it, you can buy it real cheap, or you can listen to it on Spotify. It's one of the ones that's there. So I'm going to go in depth on Ish with you, Philip, for our next Randomoids. And oh man, I can't wait. I love listening to that. It's a good excuse to hear it again. So looking very much forward to those 2 episodes, Philip, the 6th Doctor Randomoid show. So that's coming up real soon.
Yeah, well, they're 2 stories I haven't heard for a long time. So it'll be good to get back into them and see what I remember about them.
So that's it for today. Thanks so much, Philip, for organising that chat with David Bishop. It was fantastic to hear from him.
My pleasure, and it was great to hear from you as well.
Oh, thank you, eventually. All right, we'll catch you all next time for the next instalment of the Sirens of Audio.
See you all.
This has been the Sirens of Audio, episode 105, reviewing the Companion Chronicles, The Last Post, and Doctor Who Unbound, Full Fathom 5, with our guest David Bishop and your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. Theme music by the Jackpot Golden Boys. Contact details Links to our podcast and video locations, social media, and much more can be found at sirensofaudio.com. Send us some audio feedback via anchor.fm/sirensofaudio, or drop us a line at sirensofaudio@gmail.com, or even drop a comment if you're watching on YouTube to give us your thoughts about a podcast or the latest drama you've been listening to, and we'll share it on a future episode. In the meantime, keep spinning that audio drama, because audio drama